We
Okay.
got.
Good to go.
All right, I'm going to grab the screen then, and I am going to start. I'm going to take you with me on what I hope you'll agree is a fabulous trip to an absolutely beautiful country. Oh, let's see if I can do this. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, everybody can hear me? Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so this trip was in October of 2021. I was originally scheduled to go in October of 2020, and you can imagine that that didn't happen. So when I went, it was the first trip I made post-COVID, and I should also add that I had just finished treatment for breast cancer, so I had a really pretty exciting year and a half leading up to going to Colombia. So I was like really ready to go. I also had a certain amount of trepidation about it because the State Department still lists Colombia as a dangerous place to go. And of course, I watch Narcos, so I was sure that I was likely to be gunned down on the street corners, if I were on the street. So anyway, I uh-oh, now it's not liking me too. Let's see here. This, of course, didn't happen when Sandy and I did the test run the other day, but I am not able to advance my PowerPoint. So
Try
let me,
using the down arrow or a page down.
nope, nothing is working. Uh-oh. Let me see if I can. Huh. So funny. It worked so well the other day when we tried it. Let's see. No, 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 no. I don't know why it's not letting me do this. Oh, here we go. All right. Now we're good. We're cooking with gas now. I'll pop this map up periodically. Usually I'd use a little laser pointer, but if you go about halfway down on the left side, you'll see Cali, and that is where I started my trip. I flew from here to Panama City on to Cali, and that is where I started my trip. Stayed in Cali for the first 3 nights, and it was an absolutely lovely city. There were no signs of drug dealers anywhere on the street. People were just as nice as they could be, and so thrilled to see tourists. The first place we went, and I spent 2.5 days in this location, La Florida El Bosque. This place is well known for birders as well as photographers who go to Colombia. The owner has created this incredible habitat. He's got a fairly significant amount of acreage. He's done beautiful plantings. He's created a wonderful habitat, and he has a couple of endemic species that you are pretty much guaranteed to see here. He puts fruit feeders out every day, and he makes the best espresso I've ever had in my life. And I am not a coffee drinker. So just a little extra heads up. Um, let's see if I can, there we go. This is just a little bit around the grounds. We did have rain one day, not much, but a little, but you can see the grounds are very lush. There are just an incredible amount of bird life here, including the two chacalacas on the right that had spotted the bananas in the office and were trying to figure out how to get in the office to get the bananas. That was worth a shot. Two of the endemics that I think people are the most interested in seeing when they go to this particular location are these two. The chestnut wood quail, which is a small, kind of looks like a partridge to me. It's a very small bird. They're endemic just to Colombia. They don't extend into Ecuador. And they're just a really pretty little bird. And then on the right, probably the most popular bird, the multicolored tanager. This bird, just for reference, is probably about the size of a house finch, maybe. They're a pretty small bird, but as you can see, they are absolutely perfectly named because they are this incredible array of colors. And the male on the top is really not any prettier than the female on the bottom. I mean, they're both just just spectacular. And, when you're sitting there waiting for something to happen and that flies in, I got to tell you, your heart rate will definitely go up. We were lucky when we were there. There was a whole family of the wood quail. There were 2 adults and 3 basically adult juveniles that were coming in. So we got some really nice looks at them and, got a really nice chance to see quite a bit of them over the several days we were there. And there we go. This is one of my favorite birds. And I think this bird extends into Central America. So this is a bird, if you've traveled other places in South America and Central America, you've probably seen. And this is another species where I think the female actually outshines the male a little bit. This is the red-headed barbet. It's smaller than it looks in the pictures. The bird is really smaller than a cardinal, the body size. And kind of stubby. They don't have a real long tail, but they're just, I mean, look at that female. She's just extraordinary.
Wow, look at the colors. Oh,
I
God.
know. I mean, it's like, when
Ah.
does I think she's prettier than the male. The male's gorgeous too, but I think the female's. And no, I didn't juice up these colors at all. So this is right out of the camera. So those were 2 favorites, and we saw them every day at this location. Tanagers, of course, I guess any place in Central and South America, you're guaranteed to see all kinds of spectacular tanagers. These represent a couple of kind of different groups. On the left is the blue-winged mountain tanager, which we saw in a lot of locations. It's a larger tanager, whereas the golden tanager up in the top right is a much smaller tanager. And I think they're well, they're all taxonomically connected, but I think they break apart at they may break apart at family. On the lower right corner is a flame rump tanager, and this is actually a juvenile, so doesn't have the full flame yet, but does have a nice piece of fruit that it had just swiped. Next slide, I have a picture of the male. If I can get my next slide, yeah, here we go. The male flame rump tanager up in the upper left corner. Now this is interesting because this is a subspecies that is endemic to Colombia. I think there are like, I'm not positive, I think there are like 4 subspecies of flame rump tanager. So it's a species that you can see in other locations, but it will just look slightly different. And then of course, anyone who's traveled to Central and South America is familiar with these other 2, the palm tanager on the top and the ever beautiful blue-gray tanager on the bottom. I tell you, I have a special place in my heart for the blue-gray tanagers because I just think their colors are so extraordinarily pretty. They're just this incredible pastel shades of blue, and they're just lovely. So I don't ever pass up an opportunity to photograph them when I'm traveling in the parts of the world that they travel in. They're like a mid-sized tanager too. They're not real small, but they're not real big. And I think we saw, oh gosh, I think we saw 4 different species of brush finch during the trip. This is a chestnut cap brush finch. They're in the sparrow family, and I don't know that they're taxonomically close to anything in our sparrows, but they are, they are sparrows. And then the green honey creeper, again, if you've traveled into Central America, you've seen this species with a tiny bit of variation. The subspecies in Colombia looks just a little bit different. And I should have grabbed one of my images from Costa Rica to do a side-by-side so you could see the differences. They're subtle. And this was, I think Sandy and I were talking about this the other day. This is a bird it's only partially well named because the female is bright green, but the male obviously isn't. We saw this species in several locations. Euphonias, if you're not familiar with them, are incredibly tiny birds. They're, I would say they're the size of our chickadees or possibly even a little smaller. They are really tiny. And but it doesn't stop them from zooming right into fruit feeders or other places where there's delicious food to be had and really squaring off with bigger birds. In this particular case, the male definitely does get the nod for most handsome because he really is, although that is not an orange belly. I would have called him a yellow-bellied euphonia, but that's me. But they're really pretty little birds and fun when they show up. They come in, they grab food, they leave. I think one of the birds I most wanted to see when I went to Colombia was the Inca jay. And as many of you know, these used to be classified as the same species as the jays that you find in South Texas and I think some places in Arizona, the green jays, but they are now categorized as two separate species taxonomically. They are just such striking birds. The chest, you can't really see that well in this picture, but the chest is just a brilliant yellow. And they're like our jays. They show up with a lot of fanfare, a lot of drama. They're just fun-filled, mischievous birds. And they're very spooky. So we would all be very, very still when they came in, because the slightest little thing would send them scurrying up into the trees. And then on the right, I decided to do a close-up of the Colombian chacalaca. And by the way, I just love saying that name, chacalaca. This is an endemic species in Colombia. It's a very plain-looking bird if you just see it. It's largish. I think it's in the same order as our wild turkeys, but then it splits into a different family after that. They're not a showy bird, but I did the portrait shot because I really think they're very pretty. And I think the scalloped feathers on the head give them something extra special and those big eyes. So this was my nod to the chacalaca. They're closely related to guans, if you've seen those in other Central or South American locations. And I think also curassows. And doves, we did see a couple of other species of doves, and I don't think I put them in this presentation, but ground doves. These two I thought were interesting. The ear dove obviously looks very much like our mourning dove. If you put photos side by side in the same pose, you can see some subtle differences, but they are taxonomically, they are very, very closely related. Very pretty birds though. And then on the right, the white-fronted quail dove, you can't really tell here, but it's significantly larger. And it's just kind of a more intimidating looking bird. They have this, big white throat, and this one was a little bit puffed up because he was trying to look fine for the lady quail doves. But it's a big bird for a dove. So that was a fun one to see. However, not as much fun as all the hummingbirds. When I went to Colombia with kind of a list in my head of birds I really hoped I would see. And you guys who know me personally know I love hummingbirds. They were my spark bird. And they were really what first got me interested in bird photography. So I was loving life in Colombia because they have an incredible diversity of hummingbirds. And one of the ones I really wanted to see was the white-booted racket-tail, who it's also sometimes called the racket-tailed puffleg. So I don't know that either one is necessarily right or wrong, but I went with white-booted racket-tail because that's what was in my guide. The male, it's a little hard to see from this picture, but his tail is two very long feathers with a racket-shaped feather construction at the end of it. So when these and they are incredibly tiny, by the way, they are much smaller than our ruby throat hummingbirds. So when they fly by, you find yourself doing a double take because they're really teeny. They have these very showy little white pantaloons, and then they have this impossibly long tail with the racket club at the end of it. So did not disappoint. The female on the upper right does not look the same at all. She looks very different, does not have a long tail, has a lot of speckling, which I think allows her to blend into her nest environment, but also very pretty. And for anyone who's traveled in Central America, you're familiar with the white-necked Jacobin. It's a very common bird to see in mid-elevation areas, and certainly in Costa Rica, and I believe in Panama too. But they're always a beautiful bird to see. I don't really know why they call them white neck. There's nothing white on the neck. They should call them a white-bellied Jacobin, but really no one's asked me for my opinion on this, so we'll stay with the white-necked. Some of the other hummingbirds, and this is just at this location, the Bronze-V Inca, which I thought was interesting. I'm accustomed to seeing brightly colored hummingbirds. And when I first saw this one, I had to kind of look twice because its colors are so muted for what I think of when I think of hummingbirds. The colors are beautiful, but definitely not showy, but a beautiful bird. And then contrasting the tiny, tiny purple-throated, I think this is a wood star. Hold on, let me grab this. Yes. This bird, it is about the size of my thumb. So it's very, very tiny. And they're funny because they won't really come into a flower or a feeder if any of the other larger hummingbirds are around. They'll kind of wait until there's a break in the action and then zip in, eat, zip out. But they're impossibly tiny. They're just shocking. Two other really cool hummingbirds, the Andean emerald, which I think is also pretty common in Ecuador and possibly elsewhere in South America. We saw them in several locations at higher elevations here. I just think they're really pretty. They have this kind of bronzy, yellowy shading on the side, and they're just a very handsome bird. And then the tawny belly hermit, another hummingbird that's kind of bland in color, but when you see it go by, they always have all the hermits have a long tail and they have this big, impossibly long curved beak. So you know when you see one that you're seeing something special. So I had to include him in the lineup. The brown violet ear. This is a fairly large hummingbird, and again, plain by hummingbird standards, but it does have the characteristic slash of violet along its cheek, which gives rise to the name violet ear. And I do have pictures a little further on in this presentation that show why they're called violet ears. It gives you a very good demonstration of why. And as is often the case, there were 6 of us on the trip. It was a small trip, and we were, poised around this place with our cameras. And I turned to the guy next to me. I said, there's no birds. What the hell is going on? And then we both looked at each other and said, oh, there's got to be a hawk here somewhere, because all the birds had just vanished, as they do. And sure enough, we finally found him, the roadside hawk, perched up in one of the trees. Another common raptor I've seen them certainly in Central America, and I suspect they go pretty far south in South America. They're not very big, but they do love to eat themselves some other birds. So continuing on the trip, we left Cali on the 3rd day and started heading north. We left our location after lunch. So we left about 1:30. It should have taken us 3.5 to 4 hours to get to our next stop. However, there was road construction. And when you're traveling through the Andes, there's only one road. And if there's road construction going on, sometimes you'll be sitting there stopped for over an hour because they have all lanes of traffic closed because it's only 2 lanes, one in each direction. So it took us, I think we finally got to our hotel at like 10 o'clock that night. So that was a long day, but we didn't care. We knew that the next day we had really wonderful things in store for us at Glamping El Calor de Mis Reves. We moved up in elevation in this location to 9,000 feet. So it was, the air was pretty thin. But the birds were unbelievable. This is a long-tailed sylph, which we had also seen at the last location, but a bird that is worthy of photographs, because it's another one that when it goes by, you're like, holy cow, what's that? This is a little bit of just the the surroundings, again, this particular location is up at high elevation, so you're actually in the cloud forest. And as we were up there all day, the clouds would kind of come and go. Sometimes it'd be sunny, sometimes we'd have some thin clouds. Sometimes like this, you'd have a big cloud that would pass over us. But it was all wonderful. And one of the species that's really well known in this particular location is the black-billed mountain toucan. And I'm happy to say we saw these birds multiple times throughout the day. They are, like all toucans, amazing to see. You can, at the picture in the upper right corner, you just kind of make out his little red knickers, but gorgeous birds. They are typically in pairs or small family groups. So we would see at least 2, sometimes 4 together. I was surprised that they don't really make much noise. They can, but they arrive quietly. So you'll be sitting there, kind of waiting, and suddenly you'll realize that there's 2 of them just sitting on a branch watching you. So that was fun. And here we have another species of brush finch, the slaty brush finch. And again, it's a sparrow species. I had never seen an Anpitta before, so I was really excited to be going to locations where it was almost guaranteed to see them. If you've searched for them, they're not easy birds to find because they kind of hang out in the forest floors, and they're very shy. But the places we went to all have permanent guides who reside there, and they kind of get to know where the birds are and how to get you to where you can see them. So during the course of the day, we were able to see these 3 species. And what I thought was really interesting about these is the slate-crowned Anpitta on the far left is very tiny, like really, really tiny. It's like a little egg with feet. And the one in the middle, the chestnut-naped Anpitta, is by comparison enormous. I believe it's one of the largest Anpitta species there are. Very large. And then the one on the far right, the bicolor, is what they call a medium-sized Anpitta. But I think they're all very high character birds. And they're funny. They kind of, you don't see them, and suddenly they'll skulk out of the forest into a clearing, and you get great looks at them. So fun, very fun. Also fun, Andean pygmy owl. We were very lucky that this guy gave us a very long time to take photographs. I think, we afterwards said that with the 6 of us plus our guide was taking photographs too. This poor little bird probably had over 10,000 photos of himself taken in that little hour-and-a-half period of time. And he was not at all bothered by us. He was hunting. He would periodically dive down to the forest floor and grab a little insect and then come back up and eat it. But I think one of the funniest things that we saw when we were there is he was sitting much like he is in this picture, and all of a sudden a group of hummingbirds showed up and started harassing him. I mean, they were mobbing him like crows do a hawk or an owl. And it was the funniest thing. You really couldn't get it on camera because it was so fast, but it was the funniest thing to see 4 or 5 tiny little hummingbirds just enraged going after this little owl that's about 6 inches tall. On the right is the Andean guan, and I gave you the whole bird in this picture because I like the red throat and I like the feet. Again, it's a large bird. It's not a super handsome bird, but I think he's pretty in his way. Hummingbirds galore in this location too. Long-tailed sylph, the male on the left. And remember this shot because at the next location, I'll show you a picture of a female who looks completely different. This location had a lot of buff-tailed coronets. I mean, it seems like every time you turned around, there was another one. The hummingbird action here was just unbelievable. It was so much fun. Remember I said I had pictures of images that show why the sparkling violet ear is called a violet ear. And here you can see the little purple feathers are standing up. And this happens when they get agitated. So in this case, probably two males, males and females look alike, probably two males, and they were definitely having a spat. So the purple violet ears flared out so that you could easily visibly see them. And by contrast, in the lower right corner, that's the same species who does not have his ears flared. Of course, they aren't actually ears, but I included a picture of a tourmaline sun angel. We didn't see very many of these, but a very showy little hummingbird. I think all of the hummingbirds in this location were what you expect from hummingbirds. They were dazzling. The sparkling violet ears were they were everywhere. And I literally, and I was sitting on the grass at one point with my camera, and I was focusing on a bunch of, on the flower that you see on the lower right. And I heard something, and I turned around, and literally a foot and a half from me, one was perched on a little shrub right by my shoulder. So it was, too close to get a picture, but it was a really cool moment. Some of the other hummingbirds here, there's another little white-bellied wood star, and these are the teeny tiny hummingbirds. I think the collared incas look like they're dressed and ready to go to a masquerade ball or something. They look like they have formal little tuxedos on. They're very sporty looking birds. And then the mountain velvet breast, the male, which is in this picture, is a kind of, well, I wouldn't say drab to describe any hummingbird, but not, he's basically all green with little white bootlets. His distinguishing feature is the curved bill. And in his particular case, the female is actually, I think, a little prettier. We were one day in this location, and then we continued on up to 9,000 feet. I guess we were already at 9,000 feet to Hacienda El Bosque, which was another wonderful place. This is the female long-tailed sylph, by the way. Looks totally different than the male. She has a lot of color in her breast and belly that he lacks, although it's pretty hard to argue with the long-tailed sylph. But in any event, the young man who owns this particular place, he actually is the son of a dairy farmer, which is why I've included a picture of a cow. And he decided a number of years ago that he wanted to take part of his family's farmland and create a nature habitat. He wanted to create a birding location. He wanted to he wanted to do ecotourism. So with his father's permission, they don't graze the cattle up at this location. And he has established an absolutely wonderful destination. He's been slowly adding lodge rooms. I think he's probably got 6 or 8 now, so that you can actually stay there. We did not. We stayed in town and drove up, but it's a wonderful place and just amazing diversity, including our second toucan species, the gray-breasted mountain toucan. And you can really see where he gets his name on the picture on the right, because his breast is just this solid kind of a steely blue-gray. But another incredibly charismatic bird, wonderful to photograph. They're just great fun to watch. And I got a fleeting glimpse of a golden-fronted redstart. It was the only one I saw on the whole trip. And I wasn't totally happy with the photograph, but it shows the bird well enough, and it's the only photo I got that I could use. So there you see the golden-fronted redstart, which could probably be even prettier in different conditions. Flower piercers. There were actually, I think we saw a total of 3 different species of flower piercers while we were on the trip. 2 are featured here. On the left, the white-sided flower piercer, and you can see the male and the female look very, very different. The female is very drab. The male is kind of he's mostly kind of a deep, almost like a navy blue to black with white trim along his wing. And then on the right, the masked flower piercer, which is a bird with a fairly wide range in that part of the world, and readily distinguishable by his little mask and his beady red eyes. These guys are very small, probably a little smaller than a chickadee, and they will fly right up and drink out of the hummingbird feeders. And if you happen to have a hummingbird feeder in your hand and you're getting ready to hang it, they will come right over and drink right out of it while you're holding it. So they're not really bashful little birds at all. If you know anything about flower piercers, when they're after nectar out of flower sources, they are like carpenter bees. They puncture the flower right up at the top to get the nectar out that way rather than going into the inside of the flower. So they're nectar robbers. And they're super cute, so you let them do it. We saw two different Antpitta species here. These were both smallish Antpittas. The equatorial Antpitta, which is just in the Andean, I believe just in the Andean mountains in Ecuador and and Colombia. And then I think the one on the right is really pretty, this crescent-faced Antpitta. Just, it's got beautiful markings, and it actually came out near where we had seen a lot of hummingbirds, which I thought was interesting. But a super pretty little bird and tiny. And then speaking of hummingbirds, I showed you a slide I showed you a picture a few slides ago of a male mountain velvet breast who is all kind of a dark green. This is the female in the upper left corner. You can see she's got a lot more color, but she's still got that same very unique curved bill. Down below, there's a buff-winged star frontlet. That's a hard one. And the tiny little white-bellied wood star. And then on the right, one of the species that I really, really desperately wanted to see was, and it's a sword-billed hummingbird, which I probably will never forget the first moment I saw one at this location. We were photographing something else, and it flew by, and I thought, oh my God, did I just see that? So it's a wonderful, wonderful looking bird. And purpose built, that beak will get it into a flower that no one else can get into. Next location we went to, we raised our game up to 10,000 feet, and we went to Termales del Ruiz, which is up near one of the volcanoes. It's actually a beautiful hotel and resort area. They have thermal hot springs there. It's high elevation, absolutely gorgeous, and a ton of shining sunbeams. Isn't that a great name for this bird? This bird is really it's an extraordinary bird. What's interesting about it is when it's perched, you don't always see those iridescent feathers on the back. It's just when the light catches them. So one of the people I was with had been here before, and he said, okay, so when this one perches, he said, just wait, and keep your finger on the trigger and just keep waiting. And he said, and eventually it'll turn in such a way that the light will catch these incredible iridescent feathers on the back. Well, I got a gazillion pictures similar to this, but I just love the way the feathers look on their back. And they're a large hummingbird, and if you'll notice, they have a very short beak. I don't know why that is. I don't know, how they evolved this way, but I believe that in relationship to the size of their body, this hummingbird species has the smallest beak of any hummingbird species. This is just a little bit of the location, so you can just kind of see where it was. We were, way up in the mountains, way up in the cloud forest. And we saw some really wonderful birds, another brush finch on the right corner, the scarlet-bellied mountain tanager. This was the only location we saw it. It's a high altitude bird, or high elevation bird, very aptly named, I think, and absolutely stunning. And the lachrymose mountain tanager on the bottom right is a species we saw pretty much at 6,000 feet and up. It's named lachrymose for the little teardrop-shaped yellow mark under its eye, a lachrymose. So that's how that's its Spanish name. And I think they're really pretty. They're a medium-sized tanager. They're not tiny, but they're not, enormous. They had some really great hummingbirds up at this altitude. The Tyrian metal tail, little tiny one. the rainbow bearded thornbill is kind of always on everyone's wish list. This bird is not, he is not fully grown into his adult plumage yet. If he was, you would see a bigger beard on him, and it would be, you can kind of see little traces at the bottom of some orangey color below the greenish in the throat. But because he's not fully mature yet, he hasn't completely grown into his big boy feathers, but you still get the gist. He's a pretty bird. And I think one of the most interesting hummingbirds I saw here was the great sapphire wing. And I believe, I know it is the largest hummingbird in Colombia. I believe it may be the largest hummingbird in the Americas. It's very big. When you first see it, your initial thought is swallow. It's because it's really that size, and it doesn't really fly like a swallow, but it has kind of some of the characteristic looks of the swallow. And this is another picture. I didn't do anything to the color. This is the color, and it's astonishing, but they are really big. When they show up at the feeders, everybody else clears out. They quickly feed and leave. They're very, at least in this location, very timid. And this is the only location we saw them. So they're a high altitude, high elevation bird. And these are just some of the other hummingbirds we saw there. This is, you see the shining sunbeams here without the iridescent feathers on the back showing, but they are still really pretty birds. And then the gold-breasted puffleg. And then just because I couldn't help myself, I included the red bumblebee. Now think about this. This bumblebee I only saw at 10,000 and 13,000 feet, which is a very high elevation. There's not a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of flowers growing at those elevations. So I was really surprised to see the number of these bees that I saw. And these are the size of our eastern honeybee, our eastern bumblebees. They're big. And it was very curious to me that I didn't see them at all in the lower elevations, only in the higher elevations where food was more scarce. But I think they're beautiful. So, and I know Dawn agrees with me. Stayed overnight at the hotel. The next morning we got up and we went up to the national park, which was at 13,000 feet. And boy, let me tell you what, it was cold. I had brought gloves with me and a scarf and some ear warmers. I had 3 shirts of my own on, and one of my traveling mates offered to lend me his large sweatshirt. And I had this poncho that I bought thing on, and it was still cold. It was really, really cold up there. And here's the funny thing. We went up to see one species, a hummingbird that lives, it is probably one of the most narrowly defined geographic regions of any hummingbird. It exists in only a very, very small area of this national park. Nowhere else is it found. It's extremely territorial. So you get up here, and I included a picture on the right because that's what the terrain looks like. It's pretty harsh. And you're up here looking for one little hummingbird, which seems like the very definition of insanity when you think about it. But I found it. We found it. And look at how pretty it is. He's a buffy helmet crest, endemic, and not surprisingly, red listed as vulnerable. It probably has a good shot at survival simply because he's in a national park that the government protects, and they're mindful of protecting the resource. So this bird will probably live on, but what a treat to see it. I wish I would have gotten a better picture of the front because it has quite a long and beautiful colored beard throat on it. But you get kind of the idea. It's a very pretty little bird, and gosh knows how it ekes a living out at that altitude, but it does. And then we got a bonus bird. We got the brown-backed chat, which just kind of showed up, gave us a quick look, and then left. But that was our day at the high altitude. By that time, by the way, we all had developed some minor symptoms of altitude sickness. We all had headaches, and no one was sick, and it wasn't keeping anybody down, but we were happy to go down to a lower elevation. Our next stop was Jardín, which was where we were promised we would see the Andean cock of the rock. You can see why we wanted to see it. That, for those of you who don't know, the big nose on it is actually all feathers. The bird underneath has got a normal bird-shaped head, and he's got a tiny little beak under there that you can't see, but it's there. But this was just one of those iconic birds. You know, you see pictures of them and you think, oh, I'll never see that. Well, we didn't just see one. There was a lek that performs daily in this location, and there's 15 to 20 males at any given time. And they put on a show. I wish I could have included a recording of the sounds, because they make some incredible sounds too that are kind of send a little like a little tingle up your spine. But amazing birds. And the woman whose property they're on, the property's, it's right up the side of a steep hillside. And when she bought the property, she wasn't buying it for anything other than she wanted to live there and create a nice natural habitat for herself. And one of the first mornings when she got up, she heard this god-awful racket outside in the forest. And she kept kind of peering around, and she started to see all these big red birds. And they were all the males. They perform all year long, and then during breeding season, they up their game. Well, this woman figured out that this was a great way to make some money. And so she allows groups, I don't think she allows more than 8 people at a time. And during breeding season, she doesn't allow anyone in because she doesn't want the males to be, and the females are very shy. So, you know, when they go into this is for real performance. She does not have visitors come into her facility, which I think it's pretty cool, actually. I like that she's that conscious, that much of a steward of the animals. Anyway, it was this was just an amazing bird to see, and to see so many of them was just beyond expectation. And then, of course, you had like a nice little yellow-backed oriole, not a bad bird to see either. We saw a nice selection of tanagers, scrub tanagers, blue-necked, bay-headed. These are all very small tanagers, mostly frutivores, and they eat some insects too. I spent an afternoon in the village of Hardin. It's a beautiful, beautiful village, very colorful, just really, really pretty. And the people were just extraordinary. The woman in the lower right-hand corner was making us a homemade hot chocolate, which she was whisking in a wok-like device over a burner. And it was unbelievable. And interesting, because of the timing of when we went to Colombia, vaccines were not widely available in Colombia, and certainly not in a lot of the locations we were in. So the people there were all wearing masks. So we would always wear masks when we were out, in public with people. But anyway, she was lovely. We went on from there. We dropped down a little bit further, down to 6,000 feet. I included a picture of a rufous-colored sparrow. Anyone who's been to Central America has seen this species, but they're cute, and I think they're very closely related to our white-throated sparrows. When you look at them, and probably the white-crowned sparrows too, they're a chunky little sparrow. They're actually, I would call them a bulky sparrow, and they're not dainty like tree sparrows or chipping sparrows. They're a sturdier sparrow, like a white-throated sparrow. And then on the right, in the rain, an Andean motmot who had some banana stuck to his beak. I loved seeing the motmots. They're so pretty. So I got some nice pictures while I was there. I was very happy about that. Some of the other species we saw in this location, an endemic was the red-bellied grackle. They act like our grackles, although they don't show up in groups quite as big as ours do sometimes, but they're very cheeky like our grackles are. But what's interesting, and it's a little hard to see in this photo, but the feathers on the top of their head are kind of longish. So it's almost like they have little comb-overs, or like little beetle haircuts or something. They're really, really very interesting looking birds. A couple of the, sorry, bug in my throat. The black-capped, sorry, trying to get rid of something on my screen here. Ooh, and hold on, my battery is going low. Bear with me 1 minute. While I find a plug outlet. Sorry, I thought I had juice in the power strip and apparently I didn't. Acorn woodpeckers in this location. They are a different subspecies in the acorn woodpeckers in the western US, but very similar. I think if you put them side by side, there's some slight visual differences, but they're not a separate species, they're just a subspecies. This is one of the other birds I really wanted to see, the emerald toucanet. As the name would imply, it's a little smaller than the other toucans, but the green color, especially in a place that's so green, was just so pretty. And this one, as you can see, was posing for us in the rain, which made, I think, a nice effect on the photos. They were coming in to eat bananas. And speaking of bananas, if you've, again, been to Central America, you've seen banana quits. So I included a picture of one of those because we saw them in pretty much every mid-elevation location we went to. This was our little intrepid group, our guides, our drivers. And this is an Andean motmot doing the thing that motmots do, where they perch on something and then they swing their tail back and forth like a metronome. So it's very hard to get a picture with the tail in just the right location. So I have a whole bunch of pictures of motmots, and I kind of like this one because it does have a sense of motion to it, but the tail never seems to stop wagging back and forth. Our last stop on our last morning was to try to find a torrent duck, or preferably a pair of torrent ducks. We did not find a male. We did, however, eventually find a female. I included a couple of pictures on the right of the terrain because it's significant to the bird. I don't know if you can tell from the photographs, but the river is very fast moving. This was really rough water, and that is the kind of water that torrent ducks like. We found her. She was sitting on a big rock in the middle of the water, and she was preening and fixing herself and just, doing what torrent ducks do. And then once she was done fixing herself, she got to the edge of the rock and then she dove straight into the water. I mean, it was the most unbelievable thing. It was like, this water is racing by. Like, I would be afraid if I got in the water, I would be swept a mile downstream. In she went, and then out she popped, like, 30 seconds later. Hard to tell from these pictures, but not a big duck. I would say probably teal sized by frame of reference. And that really concludes. We saw a lot more birds, but these were the highlights for me. And this was my final picture. This I took up at 10,000 feet. I thought it captured some of the beauty of the Andes well. So that is my trip to Colombia. I would say that I would go back there in a minute. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. The people were warm and gracious and friendly, and the food was, simple but delicious. And, I think Colombia still has the largest number of birds of any country in the world. And I keep in mind, I only traveled in a small section. I mean, between Cali and Medellin, and only in the Andes. So there are rich bird life all over the country, but if you had to go and you only had a limited amount of time, I would go straight back to the Andes. I think they're just spectacular. So I am going to get out of this screen now, hopefully, if I can figure out how to do this. There we go. And I'm going to pass this back over, hopefully. Oops. Sorry about that. I'm going to try to unshare this, but I'm not sure how to do that. Sandy, do you know?
There should be a menu on there. It's not part of the program menu.
Okay. Let's see now. Mute, stop video.
Is it red?
Yeah, there we go. Got it. All right. There.
Good work.
Yeah, no one's asleep. Thank you. Thank you.
But that was fantastic.
You probably gathered, I thought the country was just absolutely gorgeous. I would go back there in a second. It was just so nice. And, you know, this was not a birding trip. This was a photography trip, but even so, I probably in this presentation included a quarter of the birds that we saw. So if you went on a birding trip that was dedicated specifically to finding bird species, I have to think you would come back with a boatload of birds. And there's a lot of availability to see endemic species there too, which is nice, because that can be quite challenging in some places. So anyway, questions, anyone about anything?
Did you see any interesting reptiles or mammals, amphibians?
We saw a coral snake one day, but only it was moving very quickly and no one got a picture of it. But our local guide said it was definitely a coral snake. And we did happen to, I didn't include pictures. We did see some skinks that were being extremely frisky. And actually it was like a whole skink sexual free-for-all for a while. And agoutis. But we didn't, the trip was really focused on birds. So that was really where we spent our time. And we weren't, because we were up in high elevations, I don't think there were probably a lot of reptiles up at some of the elevations we were at. It was chilly, 6,000 feet, it was warm-ish, sort of, but, up when we got above 6,000 feet, it got pretty chilly.
Was there anything that they asked you to do to help curb the altitude poisoning or altitude sickness?
Drink lots of water. No, not really. And nobody had it bad. And I think it kind of snuck up on all of us. Because we started at 6,000 feet, went to 8,000, went to 9,000, stayed at 9,000, went to 10,000. And at 10,000, I think we all started to realize that the little headachy stuff we were having was really altitude related. The other thing that was really interesting, and someone explained it to me, and it just didn't make sense, but somehow when you're at a high altitude, not to be crude, but your bladder thinks that it really needs to release itself frequently. And so you feel like you need to pee all the time, even though you haven't, you have a chance of being dehydrated when you're at high altitude. So it's some kind of an interesting physiological thing, and I should probably read up on it so that I can speak with some intelligence about it. But yeah, they didn't give anything. We just, if we shared our Tylenol and Advil with each other, and we just kept going.
Do you actually see a difference between a birding trip and a photography trip?
Yeah, it's interesting. And the guides would tell you, because our local guide in Colombia does both. And he said, when I have birders, he said, they want to see the species and then move on and get the next species. He said, you photographers want to sit there for an hour and take pictures. So I think that's the difference is, we were less concerned about the number of new birds we would see and more concerned about the number of great pictures we would get. So that's kind of the fine line. I think if you were I consider myself to be a photographer first and a birder naturalist second. But I think if you wanted to go to a place like Colombia and see birds, book a birding trip, because the bird diversity there is just unbelievable. I mean, if we had wanted to see more and were willing to, leave the locations we were in and go to different locations, I'm sure we could have seen a lot more. But I came back like totally happy and with thousands of pictures, so it was a win.
Before you left, did you prep by reading that famous Outside Magazine story, Bird of Prey, about the birders? One of them was a friend of mine who got kidnapped.
No, I didn't. I probably just as well I
Probably
didn't.
a good thing.
Yeah,
I'll put it in the chat, and if anyone wants to read it, it's a terrific story, by the way. Tom Fiore, who's a fantastic Central Park birder, he went with a group, and they got kidnapped, and he escaped,
Oh my,
and yeah, and he's never, at least for years, he wouldn't talk about it. He felt so guilty about leaving his friends behind.
and his name is Fiore, Fiori.
Fiore, Tom
Okay.
Fiore. I'll send you the link right now. I'll put it in the
Okay,
chat.
great. Yeah, I'm a big reader, so yeah, I'd love to read that. In fact, in preparation for going to South Africa, I read Nelson Mandela's biography, which was like unbelievably interesting. But yeah,
It's much shorter.
yeah, that's a long book. Yeah, I did have trepidation about going because, when I went to the State Department website to see what do I need to get, they were like, don't go to Colombia, don't go to Colombia, be careful, people are, it was like, oh my God. So the guy that I was going with, I knew, I've traveled with him before. So I texted him, I said, Jeff, are we going to be safe? And he's like, yes, of course I'm not going to take you any place where you're not going to be safe. But yeah, I'm sure that you could get into trouble in Colombia. I think you can get into trouble anywhere. I'm in Sussex County. You could probably get into trouble here. But, and I can't imagine personally traveling to Colombia without having a guide. I don't speak Spanish. So, I would, if nothing else, need someone to help me muddle through communications.
Other than the roadside hawk, did you see any other raptors at the higher elevations?
We did see an Andean condor. It was very high up, very far away. It was unmistakable, and our local guides both said, yeah, no, that's an Andean condor. But we were at 13,000 feet and it was higher by a long
Wow.
shot. Yeah, it was, but you know what? It was one of those things where you stood there and you thought to yourself, at least I did, I'm looking at an Andean condor right now. I'm humbled. It was a moment for me, definitely. I had a lot of moments on this trip where I found myself having a lump in my throat and feeling really grateful that I could be there, but humbled. It was beautiful. I think we did see some vultures too. It's interesting. Almost everywhere you go, you see black vultures and turkey vultures. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Deb? That
Sounds
was
like you
a,
covered it.
that was a magnificent program. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No, I
Yeah,
love
that was amazing.
Thank you. I love doing it. I love reliving the trip myself because it was really, really fun. So, and I hope that you guys, some of you have a chance to go someday because I promise you, you will not be disappointed.
Thank you again. Thank you for joining us, and thank you everybody else that's here tonight. Again, we'll see you guys September, if not for the virtual bird walk on May 30th. And
If you're going to participate in the virtual bird walk, yeah, just let me know that you're going to show pictures, or let me know that you want me to show your pictures. Either way will be fine. And the theme is pick a place. So Debbie, if you want to join us, you can get a little more Colombia in there.
or Africa. I want to see Africa.
I'm still sorting through my Africa pictures. I will just share one thing with you though. I don't know if you can see this or not, but
Oh yeah.
What kind of bird is that?
yeah, that's a bangy bird.
Check out her Flickr page.
I'm still adding to it. I mean, I honestly haven't gone through a lot of the birds yet. So it was, mammals, a lot of mammals. Anyway.
I'll tell you a quick story. I was in Sarasota, Florida with a bird guide, friend of mine. And while we were looking at the birds, all of a sudden we thought we heard lions. And it turns out we did. There's a woman nearby that has a bunch of lions.
You're kidding. Oh my God.
It's Florida. They do strange things there.
Oh, Florida has some very strange things going on. I like, why are people still allowed to keep wild animals? That's crazy, isn't it?
I don't know. Do we still have the tigers in New Jersey?
I don't think so. I think they escaped one too many times and they ended up being rehomed.
Yeah.
I think there's
Probably.
still some animals after jungle habitat went out of business. I think there's still a population somewhere up in the northern part of our state.
Probably.
Good luck.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Well, anyway.
Thank you again.
Thank you guys much. It really was a pleasure being with you.
We'll see you
Thank
guys
you.
in for the next meeting or the virtual bird walk, if not in September. Thank you guys. Good night.
Night, guys.
She'll end it all for everybody now.
All right, thanks.